So, I'm a healthcare assistant, right? Been at this nursing home for elderly folks with dementia for about half a year now. One particular night shift, all our residents are tucked in their beds in their individual rooms. My partner's off on a break, and the nurses are upstairs at their station, so it's just me. I'm helping this bedbound gentleman who has schizophrenia and dementia. He doesn't usually talk other than to yell, "What the hell are you doing?" at us when we try to help him have a drink. He just doesn't get why he's there, because of his mental health conditions. So I'm helping this guy, and he looks around the room really slowly with his eyes, resting his gaze at various points every few seconds. When his eyes finally land on me, he says, "We're all here." It was a bit creepy, but I was honestly pleased that the gentleman spoke to me. We've been encouraging him a lot lately to use his words instead of just screaming at us. So I asked him, "Who's all here?" He replied with, "They died here. And all died here." Then he looked right at me and said, "You'll die here if you don't leave first. Everyone will leave or die." Again, a tad creepy, but I just assumed he was having a bit of a schizophrenic episode, or maybe even that he'd figured out he was a resident in a nursing home and wanted to talk about it. I walk out of his room, and as I head down the corridor, the emergency alarm bell starts ringing. I checked my pager, and it's the room of the gentleman I was just assisting. The thing is, he doesn't know how to use the call bell to set off the alarm, and he isn't physically able to either. He just can't. Now I rushed back to his room, and he's looking at the floor opposite his bed and screaming and crying and shouting, "You're cruel, Jack. You're cruel. The poor children. The poor little babies." I slammed the light on and ran up to him. He was still screaming something that sounded like, "Their little blue lips. Stop showing me, Jack. There's no one in the room but him and me." The nurse eventually arrived, also responding to his emergency alarm. She gave him medication to calm him down, and she just put it down to an episode, as I originally did. It wasn't until my partner got off her break. She's been working at the home for 12 years. The nurse only started here in the last month or so that I learned about a gentleman who previously lived in that very residence. He'd been there for a couple of months before he passed away about 10 years ago. He was a 90-odd-year-old man called Jack, who had been convicted of murdering his 2 children when he was younger. The current resident had no way of knowing this either, as he wasn't in the home when this Jack man was, and we won't speak about one resident in front of others, as we aren't allowed to, due to confidentiality. Also, how did he use his call bell to summon us and press the emergency alarm? It's something he hasn't been able to do since he moved into the home. I guess it could just be explained as a schizophrenic episode with coincidental similarities. Either way, though, I won't be doing night shift here anymore. I'm not too sure where to begin with this since I've only ever told my wife about these situations before. I'll just start here. I have a best friend named Wesley. We're so close that we're practically brothers, and weirdly, we've always been on the same page with where we are in life, how we're feeling that week, what we've been thinking, so much so that we even have a word to describe our freaky frequencies being synced. We met in sophomore year of high school, where he soon moved down the street from me with his mom in 2011. I also have 2 other very close friends that I see regularly. Nick, whom I've known since 8th grade, and Daniel, who I met through Wesley. Okay, so names of the primary people have been established. Let's get to where it started, in the summer of 2013. So Wesley called me up to tell me about a dream that he had the previous night. In his words, he said, "Dude, I was with my grandma Emily at the house when we both had the urge to go up to the garage. We step in, and there's this evil, menacing, smiling fox head with a yellow top hat floating next to a whiteboard. It was gesturing to us to have a seat in front of him. We sit down, and he began to write something, but as soon as we began to read it, it just disappears. He writes the words again, but like last time, they just disappear. The 3rd time he writes it, we're both able to read it at the same time, Gorgo, and then I just wake up. I told him that sounded pretty intense and weird. He agrees and also tells me another weird thing about the dream. When's the last time you actually read something in a dream? To be honest, I don't think I ever have, let alone retain what I read, I told him that and also said that I knew the name Gorgo, that I'd heard it before. So we met up and did some research and found some things on Gorgo. Specifically, It's a Greek demon who brings death and pain to people. We both kind of laughed and said that it was a bit trippy and just left it at that. Months went by, and we found out that his grandmother Emily developed a brain tumor, and unfortunately she passed 2 months after that. The first time we hung out after that, he brought up the dream again, and what we found out about the name Gorgo, and the weird coincidence of his grandmother's death. We both thought that it was just that, a weird coincidence. But this is when he tells me that the dream wasn't the only thing going on. Wesley's logical, scientific, and smart. He doesn't spout paranormal things like ever. He loves science, reasoning, and logic. So when he told me about more experiences, I was shocked and skeptical, to say the least, thinking that he was just bullshitting me. He is a good bullshitter. He told me about his first run-in with whatever. This was a couple of weeks after moving in. He said that he heard a little girl run down his hallway, laughing. He, for whatever reason, didn't think much of it. But later on that week, while trying to get some sleep, he heard a little girl laugh in the closet next to his bed. And this obviously got his attention this time. He turned on the light, opened his closet door, and there was nothing. He slept with the light on after that and ultimately dismissed it for just being too tired. He told me he didn't think much of it until maybe a month or so later when he was hanging out with his cousin and his cousin's girlfriend, Ashley. They're all at Wesley's house. His cousin's girlfriend remarked, "Oh, you live in Jenna's old house." Jenna and Ashley, they used to be best friends. Wesley was about to say that he knew that, but couldn't finish his sentence due to Ashley's interruption. "You heard about the little girl yet? She laughs a lot." Wesley said no, so as not to freak anyone out, he told me. But inside, he was nervous because now someone else who had no idea of knowing what Wesley was experiencing went through the same thing. He also told me of apparitions in his room, a tall black figure standing over him at night. His mom saw an electric field, static distorted ball thing, as he described it, coming up from under Wesley's bedroom door and whizzed right past her ear, sending like static in the hallway. This was all really cool for me, if I'm being honest, as I love reading about this stuff. But nothing ever happened to me. That is, until it did. Wesley, Daniel, Nick, and I were all hanging out in what we called the creepy room. Another not as weird story, but that's for another time. I was sitting on a chair in view of the family room, and I can see enough to tell if someone walks through it. Now we're all chatting while Daniel was playing on his phone when I hear the sliding door in the kitchen slam shut, with the sound of the alarm confirming to us that a door closed. I look around and see that Nick and Wesley, they didn't notice straight away. Daniel, however, made eyes with me and said, "Did you hear the door close too?" I nodded with goosebumps all over me, just like now writing the story. As his mom was way out of town, it was just us. Wesley and Nick stopped talking and said, "What door?" We told them that it sounded like the kitchen sliding glass door just slammed shut and asked if they heard the alarm chime. But they didn't. We all go out to the kitchen and see that the door is closed and latched. This tells us that if someone closed it, they had to have closed it from the inside, as it's latched, and walked out. That means that someone would have had to have come through the front door, walked through the family room and into the kitchen to do that, but I definitely would have seen them, and I didn't. Obviously, also, the front door is locked, and the alarm chime only went off once. It goes off when you close and open the door leading outside. If someone opened the front door and opened the sliding door, the chime would have gone off twice. Only going off once means that the sliding door was open to begin with. But yet, we were in the kitchen 10 minutes before going to the creepy room, and it was closed. We obviously searched the house with weapons in case of an intruder, but to no avail. It was just us. We still, to this day, have no way to explain how that was all possible. And with Wesley's experiences in that house, we all kind of just accepted that it was something to do with what we couldn't explain. So for the rest of the night, we just hung outside. This happened last year at a new job. This guy, Mike, was in charge of my training. At first, he seemed like a nice guy. We talked about common interests, had lunch together, normal things coworkers do. Then one day, he started to overshare things from his personal life, like, "I hate my wife," who I knew was pregnant at the time. And, "If I told you I cut myself in a place that only God and I can see, would you want to know where?" Now keep in mind, I had known this guy for all of 3 weeks when this started happening, And the most personal thing I'd ever shared was that I had been on Prozac in my first year of college, which I didn't think was a big deal because doctors prescribe it like candy anyway. This is important, you'll see why later. In the end, I just said, whatever. Now, I didn't want to piss him off because what if he started bad-mouthing me to the managers? Still, I did my best to change the subject when he went too far, which was now becoming a daily thing. I also avoided being alone with him as much as possible. That didn't stop Mike from deciding that I was now his best friend and sister. He started actually referring to me as his sister from another mother, and then just his sister in front of other people from the office. The first couple times he did it, I laughed it off, but then it stopped being funny because in his mind, this was now a fact. He even tried to make the relationship official on Facebook. I had added him along with some other people from work. Big mistake, I know. By this point, my actual biological brother was itching to have a talk with this guy, but I told him it wasn't a big deal, and I tried to gently extricate myself from the situation. Well, gently extricate myself didn't work, I was having lunch with this other guy from work in the canteen one day. This is a guy who finished the same course I did, different year though, so we had lots to talk about, and I really actually liked having someone around my age to talk to. Anyway, I could see Mike giving me the stink eye from across the room. He was eating alone in a very obvious "look what you're doing to me" display. The same evening, the other guy messages me on Facebook, telling me that Mike's texting him over Slack about me. We use Slack at work, and some people have it on their phone for work stuff. He shows me screenshots of the convo, and Mike is basically saying stuff like, "I'll protect her to my dying breath from scum like you, and if you break her heart, I'll break you." This is some of the most cringe and disturbing stuff that I've ever read from an actual person I know in real life. The other guy rightfully asks me, "What the hell is going on? Did I tell Mike that we were together or something?" Because if I did, he apologizes if he sent me the wrong signals, but we were most definitely not together. I'm pretty pissed by now, not just because this is threatening one of the few friendships I have at work, but because this whole thing is messed up all around. So I messaged Mike asking him to stop threatening my friend, while also apologizing to the other guy over the misunderstanding. Mike texts back, though, with something like, "I'm just looking out for you." That's what brothers do. Okay, deep breath. This is happening. I messaged him telling him that he's a very good friend, emphasis on friend, but I don't need to be looked out for. Really, I don't. He comes back with, "Then I'll just protect you from the shadows," and a winky face. He says some other cringe crap about me being young and naive, which makes me a target. What? But by this point, I'm 300% done with whatever he thinks this is, so I just end up blocking him. The next morning, Mike comes in late, suits his butt down, and immediately texts me on Slack, "Are you okay?" Which I promptly ignore. A bit later, he gets up to go for a smoke break, and as he goes past my desk, he says, "I saw you. Did you see it?" "Yeah, I saw it, but I'm not doing this anymore." I pull off some generic "sorry, I'm busy" line and mind my own business. Lunch comes and goes, and the day goes by without a word from him until about 10 minutes before it's time to go home when I get a wall of text on my Slack that basically makes me realize that what's happening in Mike's head has absolutely nothing to do with real life. Zero. Sweet nothing. He thinks I'm lashing out because I'm hurt and angry because of trauma. I assume that he's talking about my depressive episode from years ago. He says he'll stand by his dear friend because he made a promise to be my brother defender, and he's not going to take the easy way out and let me go just because I'm hurt. He actually wants me to take out my pain and anger on him because he can take it. I'm sitting there reading this, and all I can think is, what the hell, Mike? Mike logs off for the day. I'm still processing all of this. I go down to the parking lot some 20 minutes later, and there he is smoking next to his car. I ignore him as I walk past. Thank God there were other people around, and he just stands there, unmoving and staring at me as I get into my car and just drive away. This is where I started to think about talking to our manager. We have two managers, a younger guy and a woman. Let's call them Pete and Pam. I started writing this long email to both of them and also thought about talking to the other guy to back me up. Remember, Mike had harassed him over having lunch with me. In the end, I decided not to. Mike had a kid on the way, and he was clearly in need of mental help, which he probably wasn't getting. I wasn't about to get him fired and take away his livelihood. A spoiler alert, though, I did live to regret this eventually. Things were, dare I say it, normal, or so I thought for a while after. Sure, I caught Mike staring at me a few times, but I pretended not to notice. Then, after a few weeks of nothing, one of the other girls on our team says that she has something to tell me. Let's call her Nice Girl, because she ended up helping me a couple times after that. So Nice Girl and I go out for coffee at lunch. There's a coffee place across the street that pretty much everyone in the building goes to. She tells me Mike has been talking to other coworkers about me and my hurt, how I'm struggling with my depression, and it's so bad it's even making me push family away, because we're practically family, if Psycho says so, right? Now he's been trying to help me, and it breaks his heart that I won't let him because he cares for me so very much. This obviously made me question how many people he'd been talking to, and apparently Nice Girl knows about at least one other person. This makes me livid. You can't just go around telling people someone else is mentally ill just to make yourself look like a saint. I mean, who does that? Now it's definitely time to talk to the managers. I slack Pete, the younger manager, asking for a quick one-to-one, and he immediately agrees and says, "Great, actually, I've been meaning to talk to you. Pam will be joining too. I just need to get her down here. Pam's on a different floor." Crap. Oh well, I guess this is really happening after all. So we meet later the same day, and Pete starts asking how I'm getting on, if I get along with the rest of the team, and so on. I have a feeling that I know where this is going. Sure as rain, he says, "You know, Mike's been saying lots of good things about you." But his face isn't the face of a man who's heard good things, and all the while Pam is sitting there, not really saying anything, just nodding and smiling in a way that makes me a bit uncomfortable. I'm starting to get super anxious because I'm a non-confrontational person usually, and I hate drama, but Mike crossed all the lines. Still try to be nice though, I say, "Look, I think I gave Mike the wrong impression or something," and I give him a whitewashed version of what's going on. At this point, Pam asks me, "Did you ask him to stop?" Well, not really, but I'd assume that blocking him on Facebook and not engaging him on Slack or offline sends the same message, right? The penman proceeds to give me bad advice, like, if he starts to talk about inappropriate things, tell him you're not comfortable with this, and don't engage with him in personal circumstances or outside of work. What does that first thing even mean? They also promise that they'll assign someone else as my trainer or mentor, and they'll talk to him over spreading inappropriate rumors, which I insist again are not true. Another week goes by. Nice Girl, myself, and another guy who's friends with her are all heading out to get coffee. As soon as we walk in the door of the place, there's Mike with 2 cups of coffee, and one of them has my name on it. Thinking back, he must have heard Nice Girl, and I were going out and ran ahead while we were waiting for the third guy. He tries to give that one to me and says something about it being just the way I like it, but my heart is racing so fast that I can't make out what it is, and I'm pretty sure that I'm going to have a heart attack there and then. It was probably a panic attack, but by the time I get a grip, Mike's gone, and Nice Girl is looking very concerned, asking if I'm okay, and saying I look like death. We end up outside while Nice Girl's friend is waiting inside. I'm shaking and try not to cry at this point. She asks me what's going on, so I tell her some of the things that Mike's been doing. By the end of it, she looks disturbed and says that I should talk to the managers. And well, I already did, obviously. She says, "Why don't you tell them about today?" Part of my brain stupidly thinks, but he just wanted to buy me coffee. But I can't really pretend that I'm okay with any of this anymore. As soon as we're back in the office, I go straight to Pam. Normally, I'd have talked to Pete since he's our direct manager and Pam's kind of a supervising manager, but I feel more comfortable talking to a woman about this time. I tell her everything, including how Mike threatened someone else over having lunch with me, and now he stares at me a lot, and he sent me a long and creepy text on Slack that proves that he's delusional. She asks to see the text, and I say, "No, I don't have Slack on my phone." She asks me to forward everything else I have, not that she doesn't believe me, but she wants to fully understand the extent of the problem. She says it with the same knowing and understanding smile from the last meeting. She also asks me, "Has he been following you outside of work?" Now, she already knows about the coffee incident, and I also tell her about the staring in the parking lot. There's another pause, and then she says, "Well, obviously we can't fire him," and my heart sinks. But apparently, this isn't serious enough for them to boot him, though they can discipline him for using the company's Slack inappropriately. She asks if I'd like to transfer to another team, but I'd still have to work in the same building as the psycho, apparently. Finally, she suggests a mediation, a meeting including her, someone from HR, Mike, and me. She doesn't sound very convinced it'll do anything, and neither am I, to be honest. I'm panicking just thinking about talking to him again. Did I agree to mediation? Of course I did. Did it help? Of course it didn't. Let me just start by saying that I was super anxious throughout. I was literally shaking. I did my best to stay in neutral terms. I said that I want to have a professional relationship with Mike and only that, and I'm not comfortable with him oversharing personal information or talking to other people about my problems, which aren't even real. Throughout this whole damn thing, he was sitting there, just saying, yeah, okay, aha, with this smirking grin on his face like we were just playing pretend. The only time he had any other reaction was when I indirectly said that he'd been making stuff up about me. He said something like, well, you kind of told me that, remember? As if that would make any of this okay. The same day, I got a Slack message from him saying, if you wanted me to give you some space, you should have just asked. No need to go to HR about it. He wasn't sitting at his desk, but he was probably still in the building somewhere. Otherwise, I'm pretty confident I would have lost my mind then and there. I sent back something along the lines of, well, I'm saying it now, please don't ever talk to me again. To which he replies, we work together, silly, and a winky face. This is already pretty long, so I won't detail everything else that happened, but long after this HR mediation thing, my brother was picking me up from work one day because my car was in the shop. For a bit of background, my brother is a pretty big guy, but he's a non-violent person, even if he looks intimidating. I'm getting in the car, and Mike is there too, smoking in his car and giving us the meanest, stinkiest look you can imagine from a person. I'm pretty sure that he was waiting there for me, in fact, to come out of the building. It wouldn't have been the first time either. This isn't just staring anymore either. It's a kind of, I'll kill you in your sleep staring. My brother notices and asks me if that's the guy. Yeah, but just drive, okay? I say. But before I can stop him, he's already walking over there. Mike starts getting verbally aggressive as soon as he sees my brother coming. I can hear him shouting from where I'm sitting in the car, and he's getting really nasty, saying the N-word and that he's got a gun and all sorts of crap. For the record, Mike is a pasty white guy, and about as far from gangster as apples are from broomsticks. And this is when I lose it. I walk over and just start screaming at him. I've never in my life let loose at someone like this before or since. I honestly scared myself at the time. At some point, Mike just drives off while I'm in the middle of it. I was hysterical for the rest of the evening too, and I called in sick the next day because I couldn't stand the thought of being anywhere near this person again. I was that sick. I received a text from an unsafe number saying, bleed. Just that. My brother was already telling me that I should quit the job and get a restraining order against this freak because it was obvious that people in the workplace weren't going to protect me, and no job in the world was worth dealing with someone like this, right? I could stay with him and his girlfriend for a while if I was worried about money too. My mind still wasn't made up, but that same evening I received a picture message of a man cutting himself. You know, the kind of cutting that's really graphic and messy, where it's obvious it's self-harm. I couldn't see a face in the picture, but it was painfully obvious that this was Mike messing with me. You know, I blocked the number and quit the job the next day. I also stayed with my brother and his girlfriend for a while, but Mike never tried to get in touch again. Or if he did, I never knew it because I blocked him across everything. That is until last week. You know how LinkedIn has this people who looked at your profile thing, and sometimes it shows you their photo even if you don't have the paid subscription. Well, last week I saw that Mike the stalker had looked at my profile, and he's still with that company. Needless to say, I'm freaking the hell out, especially because I'm sure LinkedIn showed him that I looked at his profile too. I started writing this as a way to keep track of everything that happened between me and Mike because if he does or says anything, if he happens to just walk by my current workplace, or if he messages me, this time I'm going straight to the police. I'm a 23-year-old college student. I've never been a big believer in the paranormal, even as a kid. Everything to me had to have an explanation behind it. But all that changed after the death of my great-grandparents. So here's a little backstory. Around July of 2000, my grandmother's father passed away from leukemia. I don't remember much of him, but what I do remember was him being nothing but skin and bones in a wheelchair. He terrified me so much that I would cry and scream whenever he tried to speak to me or got near me. Looking back at it, I was a jerk as a child to a sweet old man who wanted nothing more but to enjoy his time with his great-granddaughter. After his death, my great-grandmother slid into a state of depression. Then Alzheimer's got her, which meant she needed around-the-clock supervision so she wouldn't wander off and hurt herself. If only we knew that would have been her downfall. In March of 2007, my grandmother received a phone call from our family in Mexico. Her mother was being rushed to the hospital after suffering a terrible fall, and the doctors believed she wouldn't survive the operation. Before I knew it, my grandmother, my mother, and sister were on the next plane to Mexico. Then, a week later, my father, brother, and I, along with my grandmother's sister, joined them. I won't give the details of the funeral since it was a painful event to remember. I only have to say that it's no way for a woman like her to go. The next day, I got food poisoning, along with a high fever and body aches. It was to the point where I wasn't able to move, so I stayed home alone while my family went to visit a family friend who lived in the next town over. After waking up around 2 o'clock in the afternoon from a short nap on my aunt's sofa, I struggled to get up and headed downstairs to the kitchen, which was on my grandmother's part of the house. Once there, I began to gather things to make a bowl of cereal. I sat down, and it was then when I heard a faint static noise coming through the door that led to the living room. I stared at the door for a few seconds and shook my head. Clearly, my fever was causing me to hear these noises. But the nagging feeling of someone being in the house wouldn't leave me alone. I stood up and walked over to the door, slowly pushing it open to walk into the dining room. I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" Shaking, I gingerly continued to walk towards the doorway, which faced my grandparents' now empty room. I continued towards the living room when I noticed that the TV was on, and there was only static on the screen. I looked around the living room, calling out for my family members, but got no answer. I turned the television off and headed back to the kitchen, and was midway into the dining room when I heard the TV had turned back on, the static noise now louder. It scared the living crap out of me. I quickly ran back to the TV, unplugging it before slowly backing away. I looked around, making sure it wasn't someone playing a joke on me. Once I was back in the kitchen, I continued to make myself a bowl of cereal when a loud static scream came from the living room. I dropped my bowl on the floor and booked it back upstairs. I stayed there until my family came home. Once they arrived, my mother and godmother yelled at me for leaving such a mess in the kitchen and living room. Even after I told them about the events that had happened, they didn't believe me. Who would believe a 13-year-old with a high fever? For the rest of the 2 weeks we were there, I felt as if someone was watching me in my sleep in the dark. This was where you would probably expect my story to finish, but no. I had one more paranormal experience which happened to me about 3 years ago around Christmas. As a special treat for finishing up my 5 semesters at the university, my mother bought me a plane ticket to go spend Christmas with my family in Mexico. After a long and stressful trip from San Francisco to Mexico, all I wanted to do was take a long hot bath and sleep. However, my grandmother's spider-infested bathroom and the sound of very loud raccoons made sure that didn't happen. 2 days later, I was sitting in my mother's bed trying to watch a show on Netflix. It was difficult with a weak Wi-Fi signal we had in the house. I began to hear a weird sound coming from downstairs in the living room. I paused my show and took off my earphones as I heard the sound get closer to the bottom of the stairs. The best way I could describe the sound would be wet footsteps against a marble floor. An unsettling feeling washed over me as the sound of footsteps started to come up the stairs. Before I knew it, the footsteps stopped right in front of the bedroom door. I thanked God for my habit of sleeping with my bedroom door locked. I stayed quiet, shaking as I looked at the door and quickly looked at the small space between the door and the floor. No shadow, nothing to indicate to me that someone was standing there. After a couple of seconds, the wet footsteps continued down a mini hallway towards my grandmother's room, and the door slammed shut. Like a 4-year-old kid, I hid under the covers all night, listening and flinching at every little sound and creak. The next morning, during breakfast, my godmother noticed I looked exhausted as I poked at my breakfast. I looked at her as I debated on whether or not to tell her what had happened the night before, but shrugged it off and told her it was nothing. After a long day of being dragged around by my uncle and godmother, I had no problem falling asleep that night. It wasn't until a couple of minutes later after falling asleep when the feeling of someone sitting on the edge of the bed woke me up. A cold shiver ran up my spine as I laid there, frozen in fear. I was alone in the house, and there was no one else but me. I didn't move, not wanting to let whoever was there to know. I was awake and scared out of my mind. I don't know how I managed to go back to sleep with whatever was sitting on the bed, because the next morning I awoke to my twin brother jumping on top of me. I'm still not a full believer of the paranormal, but after those experiences, I'm slowly starting to believe that there might be something else walking among us. I'm starting to believe we are not as alone as we think we are. Also, it's night here, so if I don't respond, it's because I'm absolutely terrified of talking about them, not that I'm ignoring you. So, I was home alone on Thanksgiving 2015 evening. It was evening time, and I heard a knock. Being in a festive and playful spirit, I opened the door without looking, and automatically felt a deep sense of regret, sort of like a literal oh crap moment. I didn't know where it was coming from until I started actively trying to place what was wrong with the situation, and that's when I realized that these kids before me didn't have any whites in their eyes. For a few seconds I thought, isn't Halloween over? And was confused, until the oldest one made eye contact with me, and that's when literally I felt like I was staring death in the face. They wanted to come in, and the way they spoke made it seem like they knew what I was thinking and were actively mocking my helplessness. I slammed the door and turned onto my couch and started watching TV while they stood outside, and they would occasionally knock, just standing there. The strange thing is that I lost a good 6 hours of time, because I don't even remember when I fell asleep or what I was watching. I do remember when I first sat down because Gabriel Iglesias was playing, but after that, I don't remember anything. When I woke up, it was 2 a.m. and the lights were all off, and there was static on the TV. Now, I have Dish Network, and there were no power outages in my area, and I don't get static even if the dish were to go out. I get channels listed as HD, or a black screen, or it would be the introduction screen where it would show two people talking about the features of the Dish Network. Also, if the lights went out, they would come back on. I had to literally switch the lights on and off a few times for it to work. And no one was home with me. After that, I would occasionally see them outside, and every time it would be pin drop silence, and my lights would occasionally go out or something would lose power like my dish. One time my phone was at 63%, and it dropped to 1% in 5 minutes. Well, after a few months of being afraid of every knock, I decided to call an imam to bless the house. For a non-Muslim audience, an imam is a Muslim prayer leader, and blessing a house involves prayers for protection and purification. I also sage the house. Saging or smudging is a practice of burning sage to cleanse a space of negative energy, common in some spiritual traditions, and bought a lot of different sources or psalms. Psalms are sacred songs or poems, often from the Bible, used in various religious practices for protection or comfort, to put in every room, including the bathrooms. Since then, the visits have stopped. However, a few months after that, I remember hearing a blood-curdling scream and a banging on my front door. I looked through the peephole and I saw nothing. A few months ago, maybe 2 or so, my mom and I heard banging coming from the front door. The same thing, that no one was there. I don't know if it was them or something coming back or just kids playing a prank. All I know is I'm really scared. I recently went on a hike with my friend and his mini schnauzer at our local state park. We had gone on the trail several times before, and it's very popular with hikers and families. It was late evening and getting dark, so we picked up the pace. Once it was dark enough to not be able to see where we were stepping, I turned on a little flashlight that my mom had given me just that day. She had said that she was worried about me walking to my car after my late-night classes and told me to shine it in someone's face if there was anyone creepy, which I thought was silly at the time. Bringing this flashlight, though, was a total fluke, but boy, was I happy to have it for the increasingly dark hike. We were about a 10-minute walk from the edge of the forest where we were parked when we encountered a lone adult male walking in the same direction as us, about 100 yards ahead. He was Caucasian, in his mid-50s, wearing non-hiking clothes. He was walking slowly, which was odd because it was so dark, and most hikers on the trail were long gone. And if not, they would be hurrying out of the woods. The man didn't have a flashlight in the very dark forest. My fingers slipped from the flashlight, and it turned off for a few seconds. I turned it back on, and the man had stopped walking. He was standing in the path ahead of us. He quickly moved to the side, and as I turned the light back on, said something into his cell phone while he continued forward toward me. As we walked by the man standing on the side of the path, a normally friendly dog barked and growled at the man. The only words we heard the man say were, "Sheesh." He was suddenly not talking on his phone anymore. I shined the flashlight in his direction while we walked by him to know where he was located in the extremely dark woods. I had a really weird feeling about him and started jogging away with my friend. We actually ended up in a full run out of the woods, and as we were getting back in the car, we saw the man exit the woods maybe a minute after us and walk quickly towards us. Getting in our car, he had to be running too, because we ran the whole way out of the woods and were in our mid-20s, and this guy was significantly older, so it would have required effort to run that far, that fast for him. And when we got in the car with the man still approaching, I told my friend to floor it, and we got out of there. But as we were driving away, I noticed out the back window that the man was running after us. So this happened in the summer of 1993. My dad and his girlfriend, now my stepmother, were living in Cardiff, Wales, in the city centre. Not a particularly high crime area. A lot of student accommodation there. I won't give the exact location, but there was a cafe nearby named the Warmest Toast Cafe, amusingly abbreviated on the front as Cafe Toast. It's irrelevant to the story, but I just had to mention it. So 6 a.m., and my dad gets up and walks down to the kitchen to get his morning coffee. As he walks into the kitchen, he is welcomed by a random man sat at the kitchen table, just staring at him. Being the cool, collected guy he is, instead of freaking out, my dad asks the guy if he wants a cup of coffee. The breakfast intruder agrees and joins him. A few minutes later, my dad's girlfriend comes in. She also doesn't freak out and offers to make him some breakfast. So the three of them just sit down, have breakfast, and have a chat for about 20 minutes or so. Apparently, the conversation was a bit weird and nonsensical, but they didn't say what it was about. Breakfast finishes, and they escort this guy through the front door. After he leaves, they start freaking out and naturally call the police, and the police come and take statements, etc. Later that day, they're contacted by the police saying that they apprehended the guy. It turns out that the guy was a paranoid schizophrenic and was breaking into the odd-numbered houses on the street. My dad's was the second house he'd entered. The first house, next door he'd gone into, it was empty. This was where he left his tools, a sawn-off shotgun, and a lot of ammo. His plan was to shoot anyone in the odd-numbered houses on the street, and when the police arrested him, he told them that my dad and his girlfriend were the nicest couple he'd ever met and that had stopped him carrying out his plan. When people say that I'm too laid back for my own good, I tell them this story, and it never fails to shut them up. 3 years and a change ago, my friend and I were walking this local nature trail at night. The reason for us being out there so late was to try and get some night vision shots of the local wildlife deer, fox, groundhogs, possums, etc. with my friend's super fancy new camera. We are both semi-serious outdoorsmen. My friend has hiked Mount Washington and the Adirondack High Peaks, for example, and we've done extended survival camping trips together. So walking a nature trail bordered by houses and streets was basically nothing for us. As we ambled along, mostly neglecting to take pictures in favor of talking about horror stories and movies in an attempt to scare each other, a man suddenly walked out of the trees and onto the trail about 50 yards ahead of us. He was wearing white overalls that shone in the moonlight, butcher overalls. Extremely cliche, I know, but it was dark enough that I couldn't make out his face. Now, there are homeless people that live on this particular nature trail, as it borders a well-trafficked highway that connects two large cities. I met a few of them before, in fact, and they were nice enough. They're mostly looking to keep to themselves. In fact, this guy, though, he just stood there and stared at us. Now, I whispered to my friend that we should probably head back when this guy charged us. My friend turned to me and yelled, "Let's get this guy." So we began to run at him, and he stopped in his tracks, yelled, and then ran back into the woods. At that point, we were both anxious as hell and jacked up on adrenaline. I grabbed my friend and said, "Let's get the hell out of here." We ended up running out of the woods through someone's backyard. laughing our anxiety away. We ran all the way back to my car. For the record, neither of us are tough guys, but we are both big ones, so much for backing down. Still, I'm glad no one was hurt. I have no idea what that guy's problem was or why he was out there in the middle of the woods so late at night with butcher overalls. I recently broke up with my girlfriend of almost 2 years because I just could not stand her narcissistic mother. I brought up this story as an example of what an awful mother she has, and since it's been on my mind for the past few days, I figured it was time to share it here. About 7 months ago, give or take, my ex-girlfriend and her sister had planned on going to their father's house, located in a relatively small town about 2.5 hours from where we lived, to spend the week with him and hang out with their friends that they hadn't seen in a while. Their mother was supposed to drive them after she got back home from work, but being the selfish narcissist that she is, she tried to gaslight them and say that they never asked her to drive them, and that she already had plans that night and their trip wasn't worth canceling her plans over. My ex knew that she was lying but was completely unwilling to argue with her. Her sister fought back and forth with the mother until eventually the mother kicked them out and told them not to come back until after spring break. They grabbed their bags and walked out of the house and walked over to the mini mall nearby. They were frantically trying to figure out how they were going to get to their father's house until my ex decides to give me a call. I was sleeping at this point as I had worked the graveyard shift at my job and I had an early cell biology lab on Friday mornings that semester. I answer the phone half asleep, and my ex explains the whole situation and begs me for a ride to their father's house. I'll admit I wasn't too keen on doing the drive, but I felt awful for the two of them, and I could tell that they were desperate for help. I agreed, but I told her that I needed to catch up on sleep, and I would have to drive them late at night as I had work at 5 o'clock in the morning the next day. The girls discussed my proposal for a few minutes before my ex gets back on the phone and agrees to be driven late at night. I told him to come to my house, and I told my roommate to let them in when they got there. I went back to sleep and woke up at around 9 o'clock at night and got myself ready to head out. I walked downstairs into the living room to see the two girls in the living room talking to my roommate while he played Rainbow Six Siege. We talked a bit until we just decided to leave. They grabbed their bags and we walked to my car, and after they both loaded their bags into my car, they hugged me and thanked me profusely for driving them. We left at around 10-ish, and the ride was not very pleasant, as my ex's sister and I spent about half of it trying to convince my ex what an awful person their mother is. She kept making excuses, and her sister was getting pretty pissed at her for being so blind to her mother's abuse. Eventually, we got into a fight, and the ride just went by in silence. It was around midnight by the time that we're about, I'd say 45 minutes from town, and we were on a highway that cuts through very few towns. It was nearly pitch black, and there were no vehicles on my side of the highway at all, and rarely any passing by on the opposite side, and the highway was surrounded mostly by various woods and empty fields. It was a little past midnight, and my ex's sister was laying down sleeping in the back seat, and my ex was drifting in and out of sleep too. I drove through the dark, deserted road with my iPod plugged into the radio, playing The Boys of Summer by Don Henley, when all of a sudden I see headlights turned on in my rearview mirror, and then I saw red and blue lights flashing on top of the car. I was pretty startled by this. I did not see anyone driving behind me, so this person must have had their headlights off while they were driving. Also, why was I getting pulled over? I checked my speedometer, and I was following the speed limit, and I wasn't driving dangerously or anything. There was no reason why I should have been getting pulled over at this moment. This woke my ex up, and she was freaking out, asking what the hell was going on, but I assured her that everything would be fine and I would handle it. I pulled over to the side of the road and killed my engine. The officer pulled up behind me, and from what I could tell, it looked to be an unmarked police vehicle, and then he turned off his lights, which I'm pretty positive they're not supposed to do that. The officer walks out of the car towards my window and shines a flashlight into both mine and my ex's eyes. It was so bright that we had to look away. Then he says, "So, do you know why I pulled you over?" "No, officer, I don't know why you pulled me over," I responded. He claims that he saw me speeding and swerving all over the road and that he saw my ex in the car with me and assumed that we were drunk. I tried to explain that we weren't doing any of those things that he said that we were doing, but he completely cut me off and asked me to step out of the vehicle so that he could test and see if I was drunk. I step out of the vehicle and stand up to face him when he turns me around and slams me against my back door, presumably to handcuff me. This woke up my ex's sister, and she started yelling, "What's going on out there?" The officer lets go of me and tells me that I'm free to go. He practically ran back into his car, started it, swings a U-turn, and just speeds off. I'm stunned and in disbelief as to what had just happened when my ex and her sister called me back into the car and snapped me out of it. They asked me if I was okay, and I said that I was fine and that we needed to get the hell out of here. They agreed, and I turned the ignition back on, rolled up the windows, and sped off with no regard for the speed limit this time. I've never been one for ghost stories. Sure, I've had my share of creepy moments, sleepwalking, sleep paralysis, nightmares since I was a kid, but I always figured it was just my brain being a bit glitchy. That all changed when my boyfriend Marcus and I moved into our new apartment. We've been hunting for a place for months, and the rental market was a nightmare. When we finally found something we could afford that didn't look like it was straight out of a slasher flick, we jumped on it. It wasn't fancy, just a basic 2-bedroom in a building from the early 2000s. Nothing old or spooky, just standard concrete walls, drywall, and neighbors all around. No vibe that screamed haunted at all. The first few weeks were totally normal. We unpacked, arranged our furniture, and got into a routine. I was working from home 3 days a week. Marcus was at his office job full-time. Everything was fine until Marcus started noticing little things. "Hey, did you move my coffee mug from the counter?" he asked one morning. I hadn't touched it. Then it was his keys, not where he swore he left them. A book he was reading in bed somehow ended up in the bathroom. Small stuff, but enough that he started joking about our place being haunted. I laughed it off. This building's barely 20 years old. It hasn't had time to get ghosts. Besides, with my history of sleep issues, I figured I'd be the one noticing weird crap, not him. Then the nightmares kicked in. I've had bad dreams before, but these were next level, starting about 2 months after we moved. I dreamed I was lying in our bed, exactly like I'd fallen asleep, when these shadow figures started forming in the corners of the room. They weren't just vague blobs. They had shape, like distorted people with arms and legs too long, heads that looked wrong. They'd crawl toward the bed, slow and deliberate. I couldn't move, which I knew was classic sleep paralysis, something I dealt with before. But this felt different, way too real. I'd feel this heavy weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The shadows would get closer, one of them right at the bed's edge, reaching for me with these freakishly long fingers. In one dream, I managed to break free by throwing myself sideways off the bed to escape. Problem was, I did it for real. I woke up on the floor, gasping, with a sharp pain in my side. I'd slammed into the radiator on my way down and had a nasty bruise for weeks. Marcus woke up to my scream, found me shaking, and helped me back to bed. He held me till morning, but I could tell he was rattled too. "Maybe we should sage the place," he said the next day, half serious. I brushed it off. It was just a nightmare. I've had them before, but they didn't stop. Not every night, but often enough that I started dreading bedtime. Always the same shadows, always reaching. Sometimes I'd wake up standing in the living room, no clue how I got there, sleepwalking, which I hadn't done since I was a teenager. Marcus was sweet, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He started double-checking the locks and windows at night, which was cute but pointless. Locks don't keep out dream monsters, you know? Then came the night that changed everything. It was a random Tuesday in October, nothing special. Work was fine. We ate leftover pasta for dinner, watched some dumb reality show, and hit the sack around 11. Marcus passed out instantly. He always does, the jerk, but I was wired. My brain wouldn't shut up, stressing about work deadlines, bills, whether we needed more toilet paper. Typical late-night spiral, except it wasn't even midnight yet. I tossed and turned, checked my phone. 1:15 a.m. adjusted my pillow. 1:42 a.m. tried counting sheep. 2:18 a.m. By 2:30, I was still wide awake, pissed off, and my bladder was screaming. After ignoring it for another half hour, I gave up and decided to pee. Our apartment's layout is simple. The bathroom's just down a short hallway from our bedroom. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Marcus, who was snoring softly. The hallway was dark, but I didn't want to flip on the light and risk waking him. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate. In the bathroom, I left the door half open. Something about closing it felt off that night, like I didn't want to be trapped in there. I sat in the toilet, still holding my phone, scrolling through social media to kill time. That's when I saw it. The door handle was moving. Not fast or loud, but slow, like someone was trying to open the door without making a sound. It inched downward, maybe halfway, then snapped back up. I froze, staring at it. My first thought was Marcus. He must have woken up and needed the bathroom. But then I remembered his snoring when I left. And why would he be so sneaky with a half-open door? I sat there, barely breathing, waiting. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the building was settling. Then it happened again, down, slow and deliberate, then up, down again. My heart was hammering so loud I could hear it. I wanted to yell for Marcus, but my voice was stuck. I just watched, paralyzed, as the handle moved. Then, out of nowhere, it went crazy, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, for times in a row, fast and violent, like someone was yanking it desperately. That snapped me out of it. Get lost. I screamed, louder than I meant to. I yanked up my pajamas, didn't even flush, and bolted out of the bathroom, past that damn door with its now still handle. I dove into bed, pulling the covers over my head like a scared kid. Marcus was still out cold. How the hell did he sleep through that? I wanted to wake him, tell him what happened, but some part of me was terrified. What if it wasn't Marcus in bed? What if something was pretending to be him? I lay there, eyes wide, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound from the hallway. I was sweating buckets but felt freezing. I didn't sleep a wink, just watched the darkness fade as dawn crept through the blinds. When Marcus's alarm went off at 7, I nearly jumped out of my skin. He rolled over, saw my face, and sat up. Jesus, babe, what's wrong? You look like you saw a ghost. I spilled everything, the handle, the movements, how scared I was. He listened, getting more worried with every word. Why didn't you wake me? I don't know, I said. I was too freaked out, not thinking straight. He got up, checked the bathroom door and handle. Maybe it's loose or the building's settling. I shook my head. It moved up and down 4 times, Marcus, like someone was trying to get in. He didn't have an answer for that. I called in sick that day. I couldn't leave the apartment, but I also couldn't stand being alone in it. I was so shaken I called my mom just to hear a familiar voice and kept her on the phone while I used the bathroom. Pathetic, right? A grown woman needing her mom to pee. Since that night, things have gotten weirder. Marcus started noticing more stuff. A picture frame on the wall turned upside down with no draft to blame. His wallet vanishing from the counter, where he always leaves it, only to show up in the fridge. The TV flipping on at 3:27 a.m., always that exact time, always static. I've tried to explain it away. Maybe the building's got electrical issues, or the foundation's shifting, or we're just sleep-deprived and imagining things. But deep down, I know that's not it. Something's in our apartment with us. I've wondered if it came with a place or if we brought it here. Marcus lived in an old Victorian house before moving in with me, a kind of creaky place that could totally be haunted. Maybe something latched onto him and tagged along. Or maybe it's the time of year. Things started ramping up in October. Like whatever this is gets stronger as the days get shorter and the nights stretch out. What's worse? I'm pregnant now, 10 weeks along. We weren't planning it, but we were thrilled at first. Now I'm scared about what kind of place we're bringing a baby into. What if this thing goes after the baby? What if it's already messing with my pregnancy somehow? Marcus says we should move, but the rental market's still a mess. We can't afford to break our lease, and even if we could, there's nowhere to go. So we're stuck here with whatever else is living with us. The weirdest part, some nights are totally fine. We'll go days without anything creepy, and I'll start thinking maybe I made it all up. Maybe it was just sleep paralysis, overactive imagination, a loose door handle. Then I'll wake up at 3 a.m. to find every kitchen cabinet wide open. Or Marcus will call me from work, voice shaking, saying he heard someone whisper his name in his ear during a meeting. Last night, I felt something sit on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped like real weight was there. I was facing away, and I couldn't make myself turn around. I just lay there, eyes shut tight, pretending to sleep, feeling something watching me. I don't know what to do or who to tell. A priest would think I'm nuts. A medium's probably a con artist. The landlord would just say, "Nothing's wrong with the place." This morning, I woke up at 4:26 a.m. to someone whispering my name. When I opened my eyes, Marcus wasn't in bed. He was standing in the corner of our room, staring at the wall. I called his name, and he didn't move. When I touched his shoulder, he turned around with this blank look and asked why I'd woken him up. He doesn't remember getting out of bed. I'm terrified of what's in our apartment. I'm terrified of what it might do to our baby. And I'm terrified it's only getting stronger. Right now, the door handle's moving again. I can see it from where I'm sitting, down, up, down, up. I'm not opening it this time. I don't want to know what's on the other side.